learning objective for this lesson is to describe and apply Newton's first law. So, as I mentioned very briefly in the last lesson, forces are measured in newtons. Newton was given this great honour in recognition of his great contributions to physics, particularly around forces and motion. Now, look, it's worth noting that Isaac Newton, despite being a giant in science, he was a really strange guy, and his lifelong obsessions were alchemy, more precisely trying to find a potion for immortality, and trying to find hidden messages from God within the Bible. These two passions of his formed the main component of his life's work. However, as neither of them proved fruitful in any way, he's seldom recognised or associated with them, especially when his side project on motion changed the way the world understood physics. As I said, he was a strange guy, and he was well known as a really, really weird guy by most people's standards. He was publicly humiliated early in his scientific career by Robert Hooke, and he really withdrew from public life for a very long time. He had very few friends, and the ones that he did have were actually really genuinely good people, and helped him collaborate and encouraged him to work on the projects which gave him great success. Now, it's obviously really easy to judge Isaac Newton, as many of his contemporaries did, but by today's standards, he would easily have been diagnosed with something like Asperger's syndrome or autism, which obviously wasn't diagnosable for another 300 years. He had a whole lot of very common characteristics for people with autism, but despite them being seemingly challenging characteristics, they are what enabled him to probe deeper into fields of science than anyone had ever done before him. So, without further ado, let's jump into Newton's first law. So, it is very easily stated, and we can state it in essentially with just two statements. So, the first is stationary objects will remain stationary, or you could say objects at rest will stay at rest. The second component to this is objects in motion will remain in motion. So in other words, objects don't like to change their motion, whether it's stationary or moving. They have this tendency to not want to change it. Now, it does come with a little proviso, and that is that they will maintain their motion unless acted upon by a force. And this is the link to Newton's second law, which we'll look at in a couple of lessons. But for now, it's essentially objects wanting to maintain their current status of motion. So an example of this is, an everyday example, a car that stops moving and the occupant continues moving with the car's velocity. Obviously, this scenario, the example has a delay for comic purposes. Another one is the tablecloth being pulled from underneath the diningware, and the diningware remains stationary. Now, these objects have mass, and as a result of having mass, they have this property we call inertia, and that is the property that makes an object want to maintain its motion. So we say that all objects have inertia, and that causes them to resist their change of resist a change to their motion. So it is really important though, and we need to make this distinction here very quickly. And you can see I've highlighted there as a property. Inertia is not a force. So when you're talking about sort of cause and effect language in an explained scenario, you've got to be very careful when using the term inertia. So I can say, for instance, this man has a lot of inertia, and hence that will resist a change to his motion. But I would not say the inertia causes him to move forward, right? So you got to be very careful in your language. Forces and inertia are different things. To end this presentation, I just want we'll finish with this Japanese comedian who uses inertia in many of his little demonstrations. He's worth checking out. I used my better judgment and decided not to show you a video of his, and you'll probably figure it out if you go have a look. But you'll see all of his. He uses this property of masses, this being inertia, to do his demos, and they're quite humorous and strange at the same time. So, in summary, objects in motion will stay in motion, and objects at rest will stay at rest. That is Newton's first law.